Hello, I'm Jennifer Chenoweth. I'm the museum site coordinator at the Oakwood Cemetery Chapel. And while our staff and I have worked at this building during the time we've been open to the public and during the All Together Here planning and symposium, we've spent a lot of time thinking about how to memorialize the people who were found to have been buried in Section 4 when the chapel was built on top of them. So we know that there's some upcoming archaeology work to possibly do some soil scraping to determine where other burials may be located outside the chapel. We were thinking about solving a few problems at once in hopefully some elegant ways. So I'm going to present to you my two-dimensionally drawn idea, and in a little bit, Greg Farrar, who is also a descendant of burials of his family who are buried in Section 4 are, and he was able to interpret this in a 3D model, which he'll show you and which will give you a little bit better idea of proportions and scale that we've adjusted. But I just wanted to talk you through how I got to those ideas and a couple of other site issues we may be able to solve at the same time. So the west side of the chapel, the dimensions of the space, how Gothic architecture is created is through a Vesica Piscis, and the window in the far back in the north end of the chapel is a Rollo triangle, and that's how the geometry of how those shapes are made. So this is an example of a Gothic arched monument that's just east of the chapel, just kind of to the left where the back of this image here. And so I took the idea of these Vesica Piscis rings that overlap to represent the adult burials, which are a certain number. And then would be the shape of one adult monument taken from that. We've scaled it down a little bit once we realized we were possibly impacting one of the known grave locations, but this is just a general visual idea. So this would be the shape of 21 monuments to represent the 21 adult burials we found. And the circles would represent 16 child or infant burials. So these are shapes without those geometric outlines in roughly 12-inch deep or less masonry or concrete. There are a lot of different stone options that would be really interesting and pretty straightforward for carving. These would have a base. They wouldn't be free-floating circles. And it's possible that we could carve out or cast in some Rollo tetrahedrons for niches where people could leave memorial objects, grave goods behind. And several of our staff members pointed out that if you use like a darker granite, it might really contrast better with the limestone that's there, which is suggested here. And then we got some feedback that some plantings might be nice, and or benches for people to actually sit outside the chapel. There isn't any immediate seating anywhere. And this might also suggest that people don't sit on our memorial also. So this is the physical space that's coming out from the building. Just give you a sense of size. So the footer that I'd be suggesting would come out 36 inches from the wall structure. We can't really impede on the building itself due to historic preservation concerns, but this would give us a certain size pad. If there aren't burials underneath this space, there could be a concrete box below ground where the remains could be buried and the memorial could go on top. And if we are excavating, we would need to consider the drip line of the roof and where it falls in relationship to the monuments, because they would have more environmental staining from the water runoff if they aren't kind of out in front of the roof a little bit. But if they are, you're going to need some drainage for rainwater. Additionally, you might need some buttress supports behind the monuments. And there's also a need for ventilation underneath the crawl space that isn't included in the buildings in environmental design right now. And that would give us an opportunity to create that if we're excavating any depth there. So this is what it perhaps would look like from the street, and Greg Farrar will present a more interesting 3D model from this. Thank you so much. We're excited to just share our ideas and are looking forward to seeing what the finished way of properly memorializing these individuals will be.
Hi, this is Greg Farrar. Today we're going to be going over a SketchUp model that I created in order to help assist with the chapel reburials. And so essentially what started as kind of just coming up with several ideas of what some monuments would actually look like. And so I actually created the SketchUp model to help to represent the scale of the cemetery and the scale of the chapel, and to see how several different types of monuments could actually look in real life. And so this is a representation of the distance between the chapel main gate, the cemetery's main gate, to the newest section of cement that was poured just a number of years ago. And so essentially, this is looking at section 4-CG, side A of the historic colored grounds. And here we have just a representation of the trash bin and the recycle bin, and a representation of what an iron fence section would look like, and with basically some signage. So you could actually have signage here that would talk about the historic colored grounds side A. You could also incorporate more signage as far as talking about the significance of the research going into the fact that there's a lot more burials versus markers. And it can be one way that you can help to educate the public about the fact that a space that looks like it's just open green grass is not quite as open as people may think. So this would hopefully help to educate the public that walks by. We have a lot of neighbors that walk through the cemetery, a lot of people that are just passing along by. So this would be an opportunity to help talk about the reality and the truth about what was the segregated section of the cemetery. And so as we move on, we move along this path to the next section of the newest part of the cement that was poured during the chapel restoration. And we continue these fencing sections. And initially I wanted to break this up and have an entrance so that you didn't feel like you had to go around to walk into the space. And so you have signage and fencing on this side with a small entrance here so that people can walk directly into the space, and more of the signage and the fencing that wraps around to the chapel. And so essentially what we were able to do based off of Jennifer's initial dimensions and pictures and kind of ideas was actually create this 3D structure of, I believe, the west side of the chapel. And so this was pretty much to scale as far as creating the western wall of the chapel. And what I was able to do was actually use the burial markings from the archaeology survey that took place during the restoration, and actually get it fairly close to scale. And how I did this was I actually took the measurement of the threshold outside the chapel main door of the cement walkway that leads into it. And I got this number right here, which is about 6 feet, 3.5 inches, and was able to scale up this photograph of the chapel burials and get it fairly close. So it's just a little bit off. So this isn't quite to scale, but it's kind of a good representation of where those burials are to kind of help things. That was important because it would show us where the burial stand for Dario Nunez is, which is right here. And that was very helpful because you're able to determine how close potential monument could come into the space without infringing upon that burial stain, and eventually his when his headstone is replaced, placed once again. And barring, depending on the next archaeology survey and the results from that, we wanted to see how several different monuments and potential designs could actually look as far as the chapel is concerned. And so this initial design was from Jennifer, and it was highlighting taking the Gothic style arches and working that into essentially a monument. And so right now we have this is actually, this bottom pad, I believe, is about 3 feet wide. And you have each of these 21 Gothic arch monuments, and then the 16 in front for the infants and children. And so this kind of shows you where things would line up, and this is centered directly on this window pane here. So that's the center line. I also played around with a number of other designs. I'm familiar just because my mother was a longtime family service counselor and at Dignity. And one of the things that we don't often see in a lot of southern cemeteries are niche walls. And so depending on where you go, the niche walls can be used for full-size burials all the way down to for cremains. And so my idea was, depending on how much space you had, it gives you an opportunity to do a dignified burial and a monument, and it doesn't take up as much space as in-ground burials. And so initially, I came up with a couple different designs. This first one in front here was just to represent each of these vaults as far as being 1 foot in width and 1 foot tall and 1 foot in depth, and just to kind of show what something like this would look like. Of course, this would just be a monument because we know how large the remain boxes are. And so this would be a monument to kind of symbolize what something like this would look like. As far as the number goes, we have 36 individual vaults here, and then a representation of this 37th, since there were no remains involved with that burial. And so you could represent it as a part of this monument. And so this was kind of my first iteration of that. And the second iteration in the back, and I'll actually move this over to kind of show this in the space, was to basically be able to fit the exact, or to create the vaults that would fit the boxes that each set of remains are in. And so this would be roughly the right size needed in order to fit each of those boxes into an actual niche wall. And so obviously it's a little bit bigger than this front one, which is just kind of a memorial monument. And this one could actually be used as vaults to inter those sets of remains. And so what I'll do is to go back over here, and I wanted to have a representation of what the initial 20 feet by 40 foot plot is that the archaeology survey in the fall or whenever it begins will be looking at the space to kind of show how much room that is. And you compare that with right here what this monument would look like. Right here, this would be what the actual niche wall with remains would look like, the footprint it would take up. And so you're able to see how maybe this makes it a lot more likely to work out as far as space is concerned. And the other thing which is really nice about being able to use this burial map is that you're able to see some of the other burials, and it flips as we have B29 that's right there, and to show kind of where that is as far as proximity to Dario Nunez, and it would be essentially right in this area. And so that might be another area that you wouldn't want to place anything currently. This is the border, planter border that goes around the building. And this type of design was also intended to leave potential space for the ventilation of the crawl space to help solve some of the issues there. And so you have several channels that could be used to help with the crawl space issues, depending on how many spaces you would need for that. So what I'll do is I'll actually move this one to kind of show where it would fit and the sizing and everything like that. So let's move this over to the model. Okay. And we'll place that right in front. Once again, this is centered on this window here. And the purpose of that was to make sure you could center it on the building, but there's a difference as far as spacing is concerned between the distance between these two windows and the distance between this back window. And so there's kind of several ways that you could kind of move this around. You could center this on the building. It would move it a little bit closer to Dario. That might be an issue. You could keep it centered on this line, but at least that would kind of transfer the kind of the view and everything. So this would be what something like this would look like. And once again, this is the one that's designed to actually have the vault spaces that would fit the remains in the boxes that the remains are currently in. And so you would be able to have space for all 36 boxes. And once again, also have the representation of the 37th. This design also leaves you with space that you can engrave upon, whether or not you're installing plaques on this or want to actually engrave on the monument. You have that space. With this one, you could also have a much larger footer, so you have space to engrave down here at the bottom, or also just basically have space so that people can leave flowers and so forth for that. And the other kind of consideration that we kind of wanted to talk about with some of the other burials that we know where they are is the incorporation of using chains and some of the fencing rods that we use at some of the other monuments in order to kind of represent and kind of be a talking point for people to show that there are other burials in the area, and to basically kind of serve as a place to talk about the fact that there are burials that we do know that are there, that were closer to the chapel than many people would realize. And so we would want to kind of honor them and kind of have a dignified space that you would kind of chain off. And you could do something basically along the lines similar to this, whether or not you have little granite markers that say B46 or what, you could at least chain off the space and have this be one way to represent some of the other burials that were not exhumed. And depending on how far you could do that, you could also have one for B5 and B3 over here. And the other side of why the niche wall kind of idea came to mind was, we're aware that we couldn't install something like that attached to the chapel, because this another potential space was in this area here, but that would have had to have been attached in based off the size of the boxes of the remains, or excuse me, of the remains. There wouldn't be enough space. And so this west side serves as a potential, and basically what something like that would look like, the space it would kind of take up, and depending on the archaeology survey that's yet to come, that will kind of could be serve as a place to start as far as that. And once again, with the fencing sections and the entrance here, you have the opportunity for signage. As I said, on the other side, you could talk about the historic colored grounds side A, you could talk about the historic colored grounds side B here. And then in this section of panels and fencing, you could talk about all together here, you could talk about the chapel's restoration. And the idea behind all this is that, you know, when the chapel isn't open and as people walk through the cemetery, you know, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., there's signage and there's things that talk about that. So there's always an acknowledgement, and it's one way to kind of reassure the public if we're close and they have questions about, you know, whatever happened with that situation, you would have signage that would basically explain it. And so right now, this has just been a great way to kind of show and picture what a potential monument could look like. Let me move this one out of the way and go back to the Gothic style monument. And this also just kind of leaves us with a lot of room to do a lot of other things in terms of what this concrete pad, how wide it would need to be, how wide each of these monuments would need to be, whether or not it's one unit, whether or not they're individual that come together as a unit, and something along either of those lines, including this, could be actually be taken and shown to a monument company. And a lot of monument companies actually create 3D images and can price something like this. And that might be a good thing to have as far as considering the options going forward. And I believe that monument company is monuments.com. And my mother has a contact within that company, and this would be something that they would be able to quote and kind of figure out how it would look, what it would need to basically how they would need to construct it and to get all the dimensions and so forth. And once again, so this is basically the representation of what a potential monument could look like, memorial, and as far as the signage and fencing and everything to really kind of bring this project to a dignified close and move forward. So thank you.